for the panel for the next hour, and what on earth have we got to talk about this week? It's just, it's beyond me. Joining me now, of course, independent journalist Selwyn Manning, who I'd point out is a bit of a favourite of whale oil. He's always got your stuff on, putting your stuff on his site, Selwyn. He thinks you're okay. Hello, Selwyn.
Yes, hi, Mark. I've faded out there for a while.
Sorry, I'm just saying that you're a particular... Whale Oil always gives you a big rap. He's always running your stuff. Are you too tied up, are you?
Oh, no. I know Cam going back for quite a while now. I used to appear on a regional television station where we would spar with each other quite a lot. And I've always got to say it was a lively experience, Mark. But yeah, when I've written things relating to... particularly in the wake of the Len Brown revelation and my view of what that meant for the politics around it. I noticed that Cam Slater would take that content and put it on his own site without any discussion with me, but that's fine, that's okay.
That's the way they're doing it, because with his sparring partner this morning, our own wonderful Rodney Hide. Morning, Rodney.
Good morning.
Okay, look, let's kick off with this book business. And just for the first up, Rodney, do you think this is a game changer?
No.
Why not?
I thought it would be, but I don't think he's got that sort of key point that would embarrass the Prime Minister and, have him looking shonky. And I think that's been its failure. I think what it's done is it's created a lot of static, but there's no key point to actually knock a government off its track. And when Nicky's been asked on Campbell Live or on 7 Sharp or on the radio, give us your best hit, actually it just comes out a bit vague. And so, no, I think that the National Party will ride this through. I think it's one of those things that has got National Party supporters all up in arms and attacking Nicky Hager. It's got the Labour Party or Green supporters or anti-John Key supporters all up in arms, and they're all going nuts. My experience of it, because I have featured in the book and been on in the news about the book, my experience has been no one in Voterland has taken much notice of it, other than that there's a book out there and there's a lot of noise about it.
Selwyn, do you agree with Rodney? Is this thing, it'll eventually just sort of peter out, or do you think Hager has got the goods?
Well, I think at this juncture, the public really deserves to have the raw information, those raw emails released. And now, if I was driving this investigation at this point, I would release the raw information, one chapter's worth every 2 days, so that then it's all out there. People then have the opportunity to digest it, to look at it, and I'm talking specifically the political journalists as the gatekeepers of such information. And that, in my view, Mark, would serve the public interest on this. Then everything, I wouldn't even censor it. I would shove everything that had been received out there, but chapter by chapter, so that each one could be checked against the subjective analysis that has gone on. In some ways, from an investigative journalist point of view, the factual elements in the book are more damning than the analysis. In my view, for example, the Collins emails, the element of, the piece where there's the discussion about how she, and it's been admitted was incorrect, about how she had involved herself with Cam Slater and a prisoner had been moved at his request, and obviously now that has been said to be incorrect. So therefore it elevates the reason to put the real raw data out there. And in some ways, from what I've seen in reading the book, that raw data is more damning in its own right without needing to rely on the author analysis of what it all means.
But hang on,
that's what I'm looking forward to.
Are you clutching at straws, as Rodney says, if Nicky Hager can't even himself identify the king hitting the book and it's all a bit sort of spread around?
It's not grasping at straws at all. What I'm saying is this book is out there. It's consuming an awful amount of time, as you would expect it would. So therefore, let's get the raw data out there so that everybody can have a look at what Nicky Hager and his team have seen. And
Rodney,
then we can make our own informed decision on what it means. It may be, as Rodney wrote, as a fizzer, it may be that it's much more. The elements that I have seen, Mark, are enough to cause concern. For example, Jordan Williams. I mean, we know that Jordan Williams works very closely with Stephen Franks in the legal fraternity. Now, even from the point of view that these
I heard Stephen Franks on Radio Live this week coming on and saying, look, if Jordan Williams had sort of heard the stuff he said he never told me and he would have done, etc., etc. Hey, look, Rodney, I just want to interested in the playbook on this one, because he's put the book out. And now he's saying, I'm thinking about releasing the source material, which will keep it going. And then presumably he could then give, rightio, on this date I'm going to release the source material, and then I will release the source material, and then there'll be the analysis. I mean, he can keep playing this out for quite some time.
Yes, but I think the trouble is he's done it a few times and come up short previously, and I think the journalists have got a bit cynical, and I think they were very cynical of the fact that he put this out at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, arranged all the media interviews for 6 o'clock. Everyone could just grab the highlights of the book. No one could check it. And then just take the one that I'm familiar with. A simple phone call would have proved that what he claimed in the book wasn't true, in fact, highly defamatory, and also preposterous, because, it just doesn't make logical sense. And yet, that night and the next morning, that was one of the most explosive claims in the book. Well, no investigative journalist, Selwyn, would put that out there without actually a rudimentary check. Like, let's not just work off the emails and make a supposition. Let's actually ring a couple of the players here and ask them their response.
Of course, his plan was, it would seem, I presume, is not to ring anyone in case it tipped them off. Look, for any of you who've been living in a cave or haven't read it or haven't caught up with it, one of these explosive allegations in the book was that Rodney had been blackmailed into giving up the ACT leadership because, someone had got a hold of some dodgy text or something like that. Now, Rodney fronted up on that straight away afterwards and has made it clear that that is not the case, which then begs the question is the book about Hager releasing all these emails and showing what was being discussed true or false, or is the book supposed to be putting up propositions that he says do have some weight to them? So,
well, in my view, what it's doing is it's revealing the kind of stuff that is going on behind the scenes. Now, what we saw with respect to Rodney, and I've had enough to do with Rodney on the show to know that if he says something, I take it as fact. And it's unfortunate, I think, in the extreme that Rodney is in a position where he has to defend himself on something like this. What has gone on here, once again, is reference to factual material on a discussion between, a lot of people may form the opinion that it's a discussion between two fantasists that have got an elevated view of their own opinions. For example, Rodney's in the middle of a leadership coup. Do you really think that he's going to spend his time reading whale oil? When you read those emails, you think that they think that it's the centre of the universe. So, there's elements there that are quite revealing, but what comes through time and time and time again is the involvement with those like Jason Eade, who at that time was working in the Beehive in the Prime Minister's suite, now is working for the National Party. Now, that relationship just there, do you really think, Mark, as a journalist, that your team, when you were leading it down in Wellington, would then still engage with the guy like Jason Eade if you were privy to this type of discourse that's going on in the shadows? Do you really think that, though?
I want to get into the whole ethics and that, because there's some confusing elements to this, aren't there? And whether the means justify the ends or the ends justify the means. We'll do that. Let's just take a quick break, and when I come back, I want to get your take on this, Rodney. We'll be right back with you.
100.6 FM. It's Sunday morning with Mark Sainsbury.
And we're having the panel this hour, and we've got journalist Selwyn Manning and, of course, Rodney Hide. And guess what we're talking about? Yes, the Nicky Hager book. Rodney, did you think about suing?
I was advised by lawyers that I would have an open and shut case.
I bet you were.
I was advised that I could have the book, pulled in a heartbeat. And And I did think about it for 2 minutes, and then I thought, well, that's only going to make it more controversial and interesting, what's Hyde got to hide.
Yeah.
And also you think to yourself, I've sort of moved on with my life, and one of my great joys is not to have to deal with bottom feeders like these guys.
Yeah, makes sense.
When you're saying bottom feeders, you would put what, Nicky Hager and Cameron Slater into that grouping?
Yes. Yes, I mean, this idea, and to be fair, investigative journalists, and I'm not meaning that in a negative way, but I mean, when you're a public figure, there's a great interest in what you get up to in all sorts of ways, and so people do go through your rubbish. They do want to get, if you like, dirt on you, and I did the same. As a politician, if you heard something bad about your opponent, of course you'd follow it up. That's part of your job in holding people to account.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing to me is whether and I don't mind that. What the trouble I have with Nicky is he doesn't check. So every journalist that I've ever known who has, gone through and found stuff or found out allegations against me, including Slater, they've always rung me up and asked me, what's your response to this? And I'm always usually deeply hurt that people could be saying this stuff about me, but I can usually get my hands on it and say, oh, well, okay, here's the response. And they say, oh, it's all bullshit then. But Nicky Hager never did that. And in a funny way, I find that truly shocking because he's sort of saying this. Look how terrible whale oil is because he's been writing in a private email all the stuff about Rodney Hide. Here are me, sanctimonious, I've got hold of these messages which were hacked out of a computer and I'm putting it in a book and somehow I'm shining a light on that. No, actually, he's worse because at least in my experience of others, they actually check the facts, they ring the target.
Selwyn, as a journalist, do you have any qualms about Nicky's methods in terms of what Rodney's raised? Not going back and not checking the story with the people concerned, I presumably to stop the very action that Rodney would have been advised to take.
Well, there's an interesting thing that's developed this year in particular. For example, David Fisher wrote a book of journalism and it came out, and then we had a High Court judge actually relegating it to a piece that was not journalism and as defined by the law. So that pretty much changes the way a lot of people would approach such things as an extended process of investigative journalism. We're in a legal sense, what the judge is saying there, that the principles of journalism are somehow not relevant when it's written into a book. So, people can't have it both ways. What I am fascinated by, but not from the point of view of being tickled pink by it, Mark, is that the methods that have been going on politically should have been out there. I feel, I hear what Rodney's saying, and I really acknowledge and that he's right at the centre of this kind of thing for nothing that he has obviously done. And that's the shameful thing about this. But the other methods, what really gets me is this stuff, once again, coming out in the raw information, the raw emails, where you've got an interaction between one of the Prime Minister's people, particularly Jason Eade, and the Cam Slater here. Now, when you look at the method here that's going on about the hit jobs that are taken on different people, looking at the raw information here, I'm raised with unanswered questions that I believe are high in the public interest. For example, can the Prime Minister categorically deny a connection between his party and the whale oil hit jobs on the alleged rape victim Tanya Billingsley? Now, that is right current, and obviously there are no emails relating to that. But in light of this week's revelations, it raises those questions on whether Jason Eade or someone else in the National Party were coordinating those hits on Billingsley, facilitating it and driving it basically on the whale oil website. So those kind of things are high in the public interest.
But Selwyn, that's the difficulty. And, the difficulty that you're doing now is, you're sort of doing a 1,000-bomber raid of everything that the whale's done, implicating, John Key and the National Party in it.
I just picked up the most recent project.
The question that you're asking is sort of like, have you stopped being wife? I'll give you my specific example.
Yep.
The example was that I'd sent an inappropriate text to a young woman, and that I was blackmailed out of that to stand down, and that this was a hit job, organised by these characters. Now, it was the first I'd ever heard of it. Now, the difficulty is this. Now, that's upset all my family, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Inappropriate text to a young woman. What the hell? But you see, an inappropriate text to a young woman, that could be anything, couldn't it? So I'm sitting there scratching my head and thinking, I've actually sent, in a way, thousands of inappropriate texts I think we all do. You put funny jokes into your mates. I've never anyway. And like in emails, you say all sorts of stuff. But then the implication is that somehow you've taken a picture of your old fellow and texted it to someone.
Yeah, of course it is.
And that's the difficulty with how Nicky Hager does these things, and why it's so hard, indeed, for the Prime Minister and for the National Party to respond, because he's all over the place in terms of allegations. And you've brought a whole new one in. You've brought a whole new one in.
Yeah, exactly. Because that is one of the most recent hit jobs that has been huge in the last month or so. So in the middle of January, that case was huge. It involved Murray McCulley. We even discussed it last time I was on this panel with you. And that followed, on the Whale Oil site was a targeted hit job on her and her associations with other people around that Wellington group relating to rape crisis, whether or not she had another motivation for it.
I'll tell you the one issue that disturbs me the most, and Rodney, I'm really keen to get your take on this. We may go to the news first, but this was the Phil Goff story about the, where they of the SIS. So I think this goes to the heart of the matter, because his take on this is that OIA that was put in to request that information could only have come from essentially from John Key's office or as minister, and therefore it was a breach, an egregious breach of your responsibilities as minister in charge of the SIS. So look, I'll just have a ponder on that. Jeff is going to fill us in on the news. But in terms of smoking guns or pointing to stuff which you're saying, look, this is an abuse of power. I think that accusation is certainly one of the most serious. So we're gonna have a chat about that very shortly. But first up, Jeff Bryant is standing by to bring us up to date on the latest news and weather around the country. We'll be right back.
This is Auckland's Radio Live, 100.6 FM. It's Sunday morning with Mark Sainsbury.
And joining me right now, we have journalist Selwyn Manning and our own Rodney Hide, of course, discussing the week's events. And look, let's be honest, it's been dominated by the Nicky Hager book. And I was saying before the break, Rodney, one of the most serious allegations to come out of it is the suggestion that the PM's office tipped off Cameron Slater to put in a specific request for information from the SIS, which suggested that despite his denials, Phil Goff had been briefed on an issue of the moment, which he had denied. Now, this, to me, if this is true, Rodney, and I know that when your time as leader on the relevant committees, you took your role in this extremely seriously. I thought areas around the our security services were sort of off limits. You don't play politics with them.
Oh, absolutely. And, that's always been observed. Put aside that one thing, it would occur to me that it's a pretty standard feature of press secretaries and indeed politicians to suggest to journalists, at least, here's a good question to ask.
Oh, yes.
Or here's an official information request that you'd like to put into me.
Wink, wink, wink. All the time. Yep.
And in this case, it's, to a blogger, which makes it, and a disagreeable blogger at that, which gives it another tinge. The question that I have is whether the information was the information that led to the suggestion, if that is in fact true, because I don't know what's true in this book now, because everything about me is a lie, how that information was gained. If it was gained in a secure briefing, or whether it was generally known or whatnot, I would have thought it would be one of those things that would be known around Parliament, not necessarily just by the SIS.
But if it turned out that it had been information that came through John Key's role as Minister in charge of the SIS, that would be serious political trouble, wouldn't it?
Again, you see, it's very interesting. It's one of those, and I don't mean to be, look, I've got no brook in saving John Key's bottom in this, but it's one of those interesting things. I had Prime Ministers do this to me when I was in opposition to them. And they would come to me and they'd say, you may care to ask this question, right? And it was often to embarrass one of their own team, right?
With this Official Information Act request thing, I mean, it was an interesting time too. I mean, I put one in to the SIS after talking to them on the phone, and I've got the document up here that I put out in its full raw state at the time. But just here it notes, and it's the response from the SIS at that time, that my letter was dated the 29th of July 2011. As I understand it from the letter here, and it says on the 26th of July 2011, this is Warren Tucker, the then director of the SIS, he writes to me here and he says, I received a similar request from Cam Slater, on which you are no doubt aware, which is an interesting part there. And he goes on to say, I'm releasing to you the same documents that were released to Mr. Slater. Your request differs from Mr. Slater's in that you have also requested reports prepared for the Prime Minister. Now, when I was talking to the SIS at that time and saying, are you people going to be releasing information on this? And they suggested that they were preparing Official Information Act responses to requests that had come in. It surprised me that the Dominion Post didn't get what I got. And then when they saw what I got, the Dominion Post put in a complaint to the Prime Minister's office because they believed that there was some sort of interference there. I wouldn't know if there was, but I remember having a conversation with Cam Slater on this particular thing. And the view that I took from that conversation was that he had been told by somebody that if he put in an Official Information Act, there would be a quick turnaround. Now, I probed Cam on that, was where did that message come from? And he denied at that stage that it came from the Prime Minister or the government, and he wouldn't go on where it came from. So it's still a mystery, but like anything in intelligence, it gets very murky the more you look into it, in a sense. But I just wanted to put that on record, that it wasn't just Cam who received this information. I mean, I was working in that space as a journalist for a long time. And in my conversations with the SIS, by just phoning through to them and discussing this, was one where it got a result.
Hey, who answers the phone when you ring up?
Oh, they just say, hello, Mark.
They know who's calling.
They'd just be listening to all your calls.
Yeah, they didn't. They were expecting it when they saw it dialed in, I suppose. But, it's always a bit of a laugh. You might say amongst your brothers and sisters, because they ask the same question, what do they say? And they just say, hello.
Hey, Rodney, I was looking at One News last night, that a Colmar Brunton poll, only 500 people. I'm always a bit wary of those smaller ones. But in it, there were some quite surprising results, because they were asked whether, do they believe the allegations of National Party smear tactics. Only 28% said yes, 43% said no, 30% didn't know. Asked how it influenced their view of the National Party, 4% were positively influenced.
Amazing, isn't it?
But 9% have had a negative view, and 82 just weren't influenced too much. Winston, of course, was saying 9% this close as dynamite. But I was a little bit thought, because this is what they'll try and do. They'll just try and ride this thing out, won't they? There's a few more weeks.
I think they got to where I got to. I never spoke to anyone in National, but like I thought, you get all in high dudgeon and you want to go on every news media and be denying it, but you actually get dragged into the muck, and it keeps going up and up. And I mean, I went on with poor old Willie Jackson on RadioLive, and I mean, he was floundering around trying to.
I heard you with Willie.
And then he ended up asking me, had I ever had an affair, and had I ever sent a dodgy text? And then you're thinking, where's this going to end? You know what I mean? Because suddenly you're like a poor woman that's making a complaint against the rugby team. You're the one that ends up on trial.
Yeah.
And so I think the National Party made a decision, like similarly where I got to ignore it. And here's the observation I made, which amused me enormously. I was at the time that broke working in Christchurch, and I have my normal coffee shop that I go to. I have all the sort of workplaces that I wander in and out of, and everyone's chatting away to me, and they usually chat to me about politics. And no one mentioned to me, I see you've been accused of sending dodgy texts. and you realise that the sort of static, my mother never noticed it. My mother-in-law and father-in-law never noticed it. The sort of static, I don't think has got the cut through to politicians, to the voters. And I think people are basically looking at it. And I mean, here's another quick tip. I think people look at John Key and they find him likeable and honest. And they look at Nicky Hager and they think, not so sure.
Well, that's why it's important to get the raw information out there. For example, I would imagine that there's more concern from the National Party insiders and the National Party supporters in some of these elements here. If you look at it from a political point, a lot of this information that has come through, there was a lot of hunches around the joint, and I think that's why a lot of journalists are so plugged into this issue too, because they all had a view of what was going on, and suddenly there is some email correspondence that starts filling in the blanks. But when this whole thing starts shaping up, where you've got, and it may be they're a pair of fantasists, who knows? But, you've got Simon Lusk, who now I understand is estranged from the National Party thing. But he was very instrumental in driving up, particularly in the greater Auckland region, candidates and MPs that would be sympathetic and loyal to Judith Collins' run for Prime Minister in the future, should she need to call on them. Now, for example, it's clearly, and that it was understood, we've spoken about this on this program ages ago, how Jamie Lee Ross, for example, is one of them, and Sam Lottlewinger is one of those who are in that group. Now, where are they at the moment? Are they coming out and saying, we felt that was too dark a space for us to be engaged with, so we're giving distance to that? Where is Collins on her relationships with this group of people? Is she coming out and saying, actually, they've gone beyond the pale here, I just feel so grubby and drawn into their world that I'm publicly saying I need distance? If I was a National Party member, that's the kind of thing I'd be looking for on this.
Hey, Rodney, what is Judith Collins, what is it that sort of seems to inspire this sort of following and loyalty? Do you have any idea?
No, I'm teasing. I think she's a politician that stands apart a little bit from the other National Party politicians, in that she sort of, what she thinks about an issue, and she's very upfront about it. Now, whether you agree with it or find it agreeable or disagreeable is not the point. What is that most of the National Party politicians are a bit more la mange, and so I think she's seen as a bit more harder, tougher, more principled politician than the others. I think her colleagues see her as ruthlessly ambitious, and she doesn't have that sort of support at that level, and so she's probably reaching out to wherever support she can get. And look, here's the thing, Selwyn, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this as a journalist. You, as a politician, I would email and talk to lots and lots of disagreeable people. Now, I was always very, very careful, but, they would approach you and you want to keep them on side. You'd often humour them, whatever. But
would you save them time by giving them the name and title of a public servant?
Well, it would be depending on what the question was, funnily enough. If someone said, can you get me the phone number of the SIS, I sort of think, well, you could look it up in the book, but here it is. You know what I mean?
Would you save Simon Pleasance of a particular department or ministry?
Well, I might say your mate Mark in the SIS has been talking to Selwyn Manning. I heard it on the radio. You know what I mean? I mean, the point is, you're doing this, right, on a day-to-day basis. Now, you could take all the emails that I've sent in 6 years, right, and you could make a great book, I'm sure, if you're prepared to go 2 + 2 = 12. And then the other thing that you could do is you could load them all up online and have people say, oh, God, this is ghastly. But at the end of the day, these are private emails, and let's not beat around the bush. They were stolen.
Which is, of course, the other issue, Rodney, and Selwyn, that, yes, they were, and I think part of the problem that National are going to have with Nicky Hager is the fact that, look, he's not as flaky as they like to make out. I think he is certainly is sincere. People can disagree with all sorts of things. But the one thing in question here is writing a book exposing or supposedly exposing all these things in this traffic, but a book based on what is effectively stolen material. And that comes back to that ethical question, Selwyn.
Yeah, it does, and that comes back to whether or not you're going to place it against that measure of public interest. And this is why I say, if the public and the Prime Minister and others want to put that measure there, then the emails should be all out there so that they can measure whether or not the public interest demanded that they be released. And that's the big thing here. Mark, as a journalist, that's the thing we all stand on, is the issue of public interest. Confidential emails, confidential communications, and media law show that is the test.
Hey, one thing I just want to put out there, Rodney, and you may be able to answer this question, because everyone's talked about the whole Nixon and Watergate, etc., etc. Are all conversations in John Key's office recorded?
No.
There's no system of recording?
No.
I mean, you're presuming no, or you know no?
I know there's none.
But
that's
the
very disappointing,
communications
Rodney.
amongst the various ministers' offices are monitored.
But let's go back to this too. Look, I can understand getting things that are, show that a crime's been committed and all the rest of it, and you get it illegally. But actually, Nicky Hager has made a career out of stolen emails, right? It seems to me that someone he knows hacks into people's computers. They're always politically motivated, let's be clear. It's not about catching criminals or people that are behaving in illegal behaviour. And then he gets all these emails. He does 2 + 2 = 12, makes a book, drops it out at 5 o'clock in an election campaign, makes a big lot of static, and tries to knock a government off course.
Well, if that's
and it's
the
no
case,
wonder
the
that Alan
motivations
Clark
are
called him a little
well,
prick.
test it out. That's what I would say. Test it out. But
Well, of course, and no politicians have ever used sort of leaked material in an effort to...
Not stolen material.
or stand in the
Stolen
house
material.
under privilege and stand there and say whatever they like about a person.
Hey, look, we're going to go to our last break now, and then I want to come back and I want it from both of you as to where you think this thing. I mean, where's it going to go? Has this got any legs? Is it going to change? We're back effectively to where we started. Or as you were alluding to before, I think, Rodney, is this what they call a sort of a beltway issue? All of us who are obsessed with politics and the minutiae of it all are buried in it. And maybe it's just washing over everyone else. We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes.
Auckland's Radio Live, 100.6 FM. It's Sunday morning with Mark Sainsbury.
And also with our panel, Rodney Hide and Selwyn Manning. We were going to talk about a whole multitude of things on the panel this morning, but it has been dominated by Dirty Tricks, the Nicky Hager book, and the fallout from that. But I wonder whether we are out of step with most people around the country, and maybe with you guys listening, that we're obsessed with this whole thing, and irrespective of how important it is or how accurate it is, it's not going to get any traction because it goes over the heads of most people. Rodney?
I think that's true. People are looking at it and saying, do we want, John Key or David Cunliffe as government? What are the parties that are making this up? Internet Mana, Greens. I think that's where they're basing their decisions. How do I feel about the future of the country and the economy? If this thing's going to have an impact, Nicky Hager will have to be smarter than I think he is, and he would have kept, if he's really, really smart, given it how it's gone, he's got a clear king-hit bombshell in his back pocket. I think he would have put it in the book if he had it, because he ain't got it in the book.
Selwyn?
Well, a couple of minutes ago on the Twitter, RadioLive newsroom put out a piece and it says 2 people remain in a critical condition in hospital after a driver fled from police in South Auckland and crashed, killing 1 man. Now, obviously, for a lot of people, that is going to be the biggest issue for them for the rest of their lives. You say I think we always have to keep things in our minds of the real world. On Monday, when I get up, I'll be preoccupied with trying to make sure that my business that I run is doing a good job. And no doubt all of us will be doing that, looking after our families and, like Rodney says, evaluating what party that is going to lead the government after this election is going to make it and facilitate a better place for us all. Those are the questions I think that are the thing. Where that book places in this, I think that there are those who before were thinking there's something not quite right there. They'll be convinced that there's something not quite right. There are those that think everything is fine and dandy, and yes, you have to deal with the devil to get things done. They'll think, oh, well, that's understandable. Where that shift in the polls are concerned, who knows? But the reach of this book through the interest from mainstream media in particular has been almost absolute this week. What effect that has on the polls, if I was all of the parties, I'd be very concerned to try and see where it's going. And you can see Winston Peters, for example, right in there trying to fill up any vacuums that Labor has created over.
I had a fascinating conversation last night with a guy down here, you sort of into PR and all those things, called Chris Brown. But he was telling me he did the study, talking to these people about their attitudes to media. And this is like a 1-hour interview with each person, and quite a number of people. He said it was depressing. He said we like to think that, we all read the papers and, and we go online and we listen to radio and watch the news and do all this stuff, But no. It said
I can tell you, Mark, we used to do focus groups in Epsom, and the only time in my time in politics, I'd get very low was in those focus groups because most people have no idea who their MP is. They'll sit there, they'll think, oh, Rodney Hide, is he with the Greens?
That's right.
And these are people. Yeah,
Facebook was the major source of news for a lot of people.
Yes.
Yeah, so good. It's a humbling experience for us all.
Look, I'd love to see the detail of it. I mean, he was just giving the broad brush thing, but it was fascinating because we think that everyone is, and it's like, when you're following a story and you think that everyone's au fait with every single aspect, and then as exactly as you say, Rodney, you start to talk to someone, and then they go, oh, is he the such and such? Is he with Wince? And you think, oh my God.
I was in a coffee shop having breakfast in Christchurch, and there was a whole lot of people sitting there, and there was on the TV.
I hope you weren't texting, Rodney.
No, a whole lot of, and it came up about me, on the breakfast TV, and no one moved. And I thought, that's interesting, because they all know it's me sitting here. They didn't even prick their ears up. And then it came up about Cliff Richard and possibly having a sexual claim against him. Everyone in the coffee shop lifted their ears and were glued to the TV.
Well, I must say, though, I mean, I'm fascinated by the Cliff Richard story.
I know, but that's the point, isn't it?
Yes.
Politics turns most people away.
Well, there you go. We harp on about the public interest and things like that, but what really seems to be of evidence here is the most interest is what is of interest to the public, which is quite a different thing, isn't it?
We used to constantly get this thing. Why do you always run, especially in television? It's always negative. The news is always negative. Why can't you run some positive stories? And there have been examples in the past where people have set up networks just doing positive stories, and they've all gone bust.
Yes. And we love gossip.
Oh, it's like the Pistorius. At home, my son was glued to, as was my wife, the early hours of the morning watching the Pistorius testimony and Gary Nels and the whole thing. We are fascinated by that.
And I think that's part of us living in a modern world, and yet we're still very much, hunter-gatherers sitting around the fire talking bullshit to each other, and that's what we like to do.
All right, some predictions from both of you before we go then on both how Nicky Hager is going to play out and also whether Cliff Richard's going to be arrested. Rodney?
Oh, I hope Cliff Richard is, and I couldn't take it if, one of my pop idols was in trouble. I couldn't take that. It'd be,
You're still getting over Rolf?
No, I can't say. Rolf was a shock to me, but I didn't admire him like Cliff Richard as a teeny bopper. But I actually think, and you can laugh all day, I actually think this is overall going to be a plus for National.
Okay.
It's going to make the opposition look desperate. They're tired with it.
Well, Chris Trotter wrote a piece that said there was a strange phenomenon that has that effect too, and it may be the case. In some ways, the poll trend...
where people get pot of voting, it tends to be the left-wing voters, the ones who don't go to the polls?
We all know that, political positions in the polls, they're like a juggernaut or a great big vessel that is tied up to the wharf. It takes a huge thing over a long time to shift that vessel off the wharf to head it out to sea. We saw it took 3 years or more for Clark's government to experience that, and I think it will take a while here too.
Thank you, Selwyn. Thank you, Rodney. We'll be back with Roger Hall after the news break.